loan me that for a while.
Hey everyone, it's your friendly neighborhood Lambomang here, and welcome to another VR Mega Play. Today we're going to be playing Doom VFR, which released about a week ago to some pretty mixed reviews. We're going to be testing it out on a bunch of different platforms: PlayStation VR, Vive, Rift, Windows Mixed Reality. We're going to do a pretty huge comparison, and we'll see just how well each platform stacks up against each other. Now, one of the biggest complaints about the game has been the lack of smooth movement on the PC version. The game features three ways of moving: teleporting, dashing, which is a short sort of teleport in one direction, and smooth movement. Now, out of the box, the game does not feature smooth movement on the Vive, Rift, or Windows Mixed Reality. There are now mods that add it in, but we'll get to that later on, and start by talking about how the unmodded version plays. On PC, you'll have access to teleporting and dashing, which will both be mapped to the left controller's touchpad. The way this works is that if you click the touchpad at the very edge, you'll do a dash in that direction, but if you click and hold in the center, you can then point your hand and choose where you want to teleport more directly. Now, this system works really well on the Vive, which is unsurprising seeing as Rift and Windows Mixed Reality aren't supposed to be supported. Because of the fast-paced nature of the game, you're going to be doing a lot of dashing to dodge enemies and projectiles. And then telefragging, which is the equivalent of Doom 2016's executions, can only be done via teleporting into enemies, so being able to quickly switch between dashing and teleport is a huge help. Windows Mixed Reality's controllers also feature a touchpad, however things aren't so great here. The touchpad is significantly smaller, about half the size of the Vive's, so try to differentiate between the edge of the touchpad and the center becomes a lot harder, especially if you have pretty big thumbs. Often I would find myself dashing around only to accidentally teleport somewhere I wasn't expecting and disorienting myself. Or when I'd go to telefrag an enemy, I'd end up accidentally dashing instead. Now, this is something you can get used to and get better at doing. However, out of the box, it's not as easy to pick up as it is on the Vive's touchpad. And yes, while the controllers do also feature a thumbstick, there's currently no way to use it instead of the touchpad. Rift, on the other hand, doesn't have a touchpad. That just gets mapped to the left controller's thumbstick, which means that now to teleport, you have to hold down the thumbstick button, and to dash you have to move the thumbstick and then click it. It's not a massive deal breaker, but it is certainly a bit more awkward than using the touchpad on the Vive. It's harder to be constantly clicking a thumbstick than a touchpad, but compared to Windows Mixed Reality, it is a lot easier to use, due to it being easier to tell from the input if you try to dash or teleport. One other note about Rift is that the game does not support any form of turning, no snap or smooth turning. So if you're playing on a front-facing 2-sensor Rift setup, you will run into a lot of difficulty playing the more arena-style levels of the game, where you have to do lots of turning around. Over on the PlayStation VR side of the fence, things are a little bit better, but they're still not without their own set of issues. This game is another example of how bad an idea it was not to update the Move controllers with any sort of directional input. Unlike the Vive, Rift, or Windows Mixed Reality controllers, the Move controllers feature neither a touchpad or a thumbstick. Considering the game features heavy use of the dash mechanic, this really becomes a problem on the Move controllers. Dashing is mapped to the 4 X, triangle, square, and circle buttons on the left controller. Now, these are laid out in a square shape, not in a diamond-like D-pad layout like on the DualShock 4. So while this is fine for dashing forward and backward, which are mapped to buttons above each other, this does not feel that great for dashing left and right. Those are also mapped to buttons above each other, which makes it easy to forget which button is for dashing in which direction. Does the button up the top dash left or right? It's not that easy to tell. This is not an intuitive way of doing things, and it does take a while to get used to. Like the Vive controllers, smooth movement is also not available on Move controllers, which is surprising when Skyrim VR featured it on Move controllers only a few weeks back. That worked by turning the teleport button into a forward button. Then you could simply point in the direction that you wanted to move and you'd go that way. It's rather disappointing not to see that option here, as movement is pretty critical to this game. Turning is also a huge issue on Move controllers, as there are no buttons for turning in the plural sense. There's just one button to do a 180-degree turn, which is a very disorienting way of turning. For example, if you've turned 90 degrees to your left, but you want to turn just that little bit further, you have to hit the 180 turn button, and then do a 180 in real life to turn to your right to pick up from where you left off, which is an incredibly awkward and disorienting way of doing things. And considering how much full 360 movements the game features, this quickly becomes annoying and almost game-killing, all because they haven't updated the move controls with thumbsticks. On the aim controller, things are a little bit better. Right now, it's the only motion-tracked controller to officially feature smooth movement. It's kind of broken though. The controller has 2 thumbsticks and a D-pad, which means that you can do both smooth movement and dashing without any of the issues the move controllers suffer from. However, smooth movement, despite being pretty awesome, currently suffers from one huge bug I'm surprised made it to release, which is that the guns lag behind your VR body pretty badly while moving. Now, this isn't an issue with the tracking quality of the controller itself, this is purely a game bug. But as you can see here, whenever I move around, the guns lag behind my body, which makes running and gunning, also known as the way Doom is meant to be played, extremely difficult. Guns are never where your hands are, they're usually about half a meter behind the direction you're moving in, which means that shooting while moving becomes a huge exercise in frustration, trying to compensate for this movement lag. While I did start to get the hang of it, it's not really an acceptable bug, and I'm really shocked it made it to release, and not just that, it still hasn't been patched just over a week later. On the plus side, it does feature some nice turning options. Both snap turning and smooth turning are supported on the aim, which are mapped to the second thumbstick, and work exactly as you'd expect them to. Smooth turning speed is also adjustable, meaning you can easily adjust this to a value that is comfortable to you. The game also supports the DualShock 4, which is a quite different experience to playing with motion controllers. All 3 types of movement are supported here, as are both snap and smooth turning. The main difference is that now for aiming, instead of using your hands, you'll be using your head. There's a crosshair snapped to the center of your vision, and to aim, you'll simply look where you want to shoot. Same for teleporting, you'll look where you want to go. Dashing is mapped to the D-pad here again, and movement and turning are mapped to the 2 thumbsticks. The gun lag issue is also not present here, meaning the game is a lot more playable with smooth movement on here than on aim. If you have the stomach for it, I would suggest giving the game a try with smooth movement and smooth turning. It really is quite something else, running and gunning around like you would in a traditional FPS. It is kind of strange having your arms and guns strapped to the side of your face, but the freedom it gives you in playing is definitely worth the experience. Now, I haven't seen this one talked about all that much, but the game is also playable with a gamepad on PC too. Now, I only tested this with an Xbox One controller, no other kinds of gamepads, but it played pretty much exactly the same as with the DualShock 4 on PlayStation VR. So you can play seated, or if you want to make it weird, you can play in a standing room scale mode using a wireless gamepad, which is certainly an interesting way to play. The game adapts to your height in both modes, so if you're seated, it'll look like you're standing in VR, but if you're standing, it automatically adjusts to your head height and floor level. You can also kind of use the keyboard. W, A, S, and D are mapped to smooth movement, which is the basis of the mods we're about to talk about. A bunch of other actions are mapped to different keyboard keys, however neither the mouse nor any keys were mapped to turning, which makes it all kind of pointless. Now, mods. Thank you to the modding community for making this game so much better on PC in such a short matter of time. Multiple mods sprang up in the days following release, allowing for the much needed smooth movement the game lacked. The biggest one of these is called VFL, which in the spirit of the franchise stands for, well, you can probably guess what it stands for. The way this mod works is it maps the touchpad direction from the left controller to the W, A, S, and D keys. This also doesn't override the dashing or teleporting already mapped to that touchpad, as this only requires you to touch the touchpad to move with your thumb, whereas teleport and dash remain mapped to clicking the touchpad down. On Vive, this works pretty well. I dropped the dead zone sensitivity of VFL to 50, and I was able to switch between smooth movement, dashing, and telefragging like a dream. Smooth movement is absolutely how this game should be played, but I would still make use of dashing as a sort of teleport like Tracer from Overwatch. One difference between this and thumbstick movement on PlayStation 4 though, is that there is no analog input. Due to the touchpad being mapped to 4 keyboard keys, it means the only movement directions are forward, backward, left, right, and diagonals as well. You don't get that same fine control over movement like with a thumbstick, nor the speed control, There's only really full speed or nothing. Another note is that movement is relative to your head, not your hand. You'll always move relative to where you're looking, not where you're pointing, like with movement systems like the one in Onward. While some people might find this frustrating, it is certainly nice to have some form of smooth movement instead of none. Surprisingly, compared to the aim controller, it doesn't have the same gun lag issues while moving. Presumably it's using the same movement code on the back end, but the guns are always where they should be, which is a big plus for the Vive. While VFL can also be used for Rift, there is a more comprehensive mod that uses a program called Auto Hotkey, which not only maps smooth movement to the left thumbstick, but also adds support for snap or smooth turning to the right thumbstick. It's a little bit more involved to get running. You need to activate some things in the game's console, but once that's done, it plays just like VFL on Vive, with the added bonus of snap turning for front-facing setups. Even if you can't stomach smooth movement, at the very least look at the turning part of the mod, as you'll really need that to be able to play on a front-facing setup. Now, unfortunately, Windows Mixed Reality gets the short end of the stick here again. I tried running it with VFL, but ran into some very strange touchpad issues. I couldn't just slide my thumb, hold it in the one spot and keep moving in that direction. I only seemed to be able to move when I kept my thumb moving around. I'm not sure what the cause of this issue is, but because Windows Mixed Reality's SteamVR support is still in beta, I'm hoping it's an issue with that can be solved pretty soon. Until then, smooth locomotion appears to be a no-go on Windows Mixed Reality. It's probably possible to map the thumbstick to movement, but I've yet to see any mods that do this. One really small issue I have with these mods though, and this really is a small issue, is that on gamepad or aim, I can smooth move and teleport at the same time. On Vive or Rift, I have to bring my thumb back to the center of the touchpad or thumbstick to click down on teleport, meaning if I want to telefrag, which you need to do a lot in this game, you have to come to a standstill before you can teleport. On gamepad or aim, teleport is mapped to a separate button, meaning you can teleport and smooth move at the same time. Now this is a really small complaint though, it doesn't have that much effect on the gameplay, but it was a nice little feature I liked on the gamepad and on the aim controller. There are a few other points I want to mention about controllers outside of tracking, the first of which is that none of them, aside from the aim controller, have haptics when shooting, which is a pretty massive oversight. They all have a few haptic effects, mainly when picking up ammo or health, but the lack of haptics for gun shooting is rather surprising. On the plus side, and this isn't really a plus side at all, Windows Mixed Reality still lacks haptic support through SteamVR, so I guess this is one game where you're not really missing out. For Vive and Rift though, VFL adds some basic haptics for whenever you pull the trigger, which does help add back to the immersion the game is missing. Another point I found is that the aim controller would drift when held in one place for too long. Not so much the position, but the rotation. This was mostly apparent when using smooth turning, as I was pretty much standing facing the one direction the whole time, only to see the gun constantly rotate the wrong way. Now this was fixed by giving the gun a pretty good shake, which sort of seemed to reset the orientation. With snap turning, this wasn't as much of an issue, as I would rotate my body and the controller more frequently, stopping it from drifting with the constant motion. One other issue has to do with the third arm attached to your face while playing with aim. The aim is built to be held with two hands, which is a pretty nice way to play shooting games. However, in Doom VFR, there is also a grenade launcher in your left hand. So when playing with aim, both your hands are controlling the right hand, and the left hand is sort of attached to the side of your face, like with the gamepad, which is kind of weird because it ends up feeling like you've got a third arm growing out of your face, and it's a bit strange to get used to. Again, this isn't a game-breaking bug or anything, it's just something that felt a little bit weird. One of the biggest omissions people found really surprising though, was the lack of left-hand support. Controls are hard mapped to the left and right controllers, with no way to change them around, which becomes a problem if you want to, let's say, shoot with your left hand instead of your right. On the Move controllers or the Vive controllers, this is easily worked around due to the ambidextrous design of the controllers. It doesn't really matter which hand you're holding them in. You do end up with a weird situation where you have hand meshes back the front on the wrong controllers, but at least it's playable. The Rift and Windows Mixed Reality controllers, with their dedicated left and right hand designs, don't exactly have the same benefit. On Rift, you're pretty much stuck with using your right hand for shooting. There's just no way to change it. However, on Windows Mixed Reality, there is an option to digitally switch your hands in Steam VR, which is mapped by default to the right thumbstick button, meaning you can play left-handed on Windows Mixed Reality, just with the same hand mesh issues as with Vive and Move. The aim controller also features an ambidextrous design, so it can be held left-handed if needed, but due to that third arm being hardwired to the left side of your face, this also becomes a little bit awkward. Not as awkward as trying to play left-handed on Rift, but still awkward from an immersion standpoint. Now, let's talk visuals, namely field of view. Each VR headset has a different field of view, with Vive and Rift being around 110 degrees, PlayStation VR at 100 degrees, and Windows Mixed Reality varying between 95 and 110, depending on which headset you're using. Now, I'm using the Acer Windows Mixed Reality headset, so mine was at about 95 degrees. Field of view was not really an issue on the Vive, Rift, or PlayStation VR. All the UI elements were comfortably in the field of view and pretty easy to focus on, due to them being the main platforms the game was designed for. However, on Windows Mixed Reality, the story is a little bit different. The lower field of view of the Acer headset puts elements such as the ammo count right at the very edge of your vision, which makes it really hard to see and focus on. For the most part, it's unreadable. Now, this probably doesn't apply to the rest of the Windows headsets, which are all 100 degrees plus, but on the Acer, it is not that great to play with. On the Rift side of things, there were a ton of graphical issues in the game. All over the place, there were these little glitched out squares in the textures. Obviously, it's not game breaking, but they were a bit immersion breaking and a tad strange. I did notice the odd one or two while playing on Vive and Windows Mixed Reality, but nowhere near the amount as on Rift. Another thing is that, as you can see here, recording footage on the Rift is a little bit strange. The view by default is very zoomed in, and I wasn't able to find a way to bring it back out so I could see more. So if you're wanting to record a video of Doom VFR on Rift, just know that it's going to turn out a little bit weird, like this. On the Vive, there is one really annoying feature that messes up the visuals, which is the adaptive resolution scaling. What it'll do is it'll try to scale down the rendered resolution whenever it senses the frame rate starting to drop. Now, it's most noticeable when firing the BFG grenades and blowing up a ton of different demons. The resolution just drops massively, and all of a sudden you're looking around at a blurred mess, trying to figure out where exactly you dropped your glasses. Now, I'm running on a pretty beefy rig. I've got an Nvidia 1080, a Core i7, 64 gigs of RAM, so I was pretty surprised to see this happening. I was even more surprised to find it didn't happen on Rift or Windows Mixed Reality. Playing the same levels, shooting BFG grenades at the same spots, didn't cause the same huge drop in resolution. I don't know if that's because of a bug that breaks the adaptive resolution scaling on those platforms, or if there's a bug that's lowering performance on Vive, but it was very strange and very frustrating to run into. I also didn't notice this while playing on PlayStation VR, where I was using a PlayStation 4 Pro. While the resolution of that headset is lower, it never was as blurry as the Vive at its blurriest. Another issue related to resolution has to do with the crosshairs when playing with gamepad. On PlayStation VR, these are nice and clear and visible. However, on Vive, they're not as visible and easy to see. I think this has to do with them not scaling to the resolution, becoming smaller on Vive, but the ones made out of thin lines become noticeably harder to focus on. This may not be too much of an issue though, as I'd wager most people on PC would be playing with motion controls, not a gamepad anyway. So where does all of this leave us? Which platform is the best to play Doom VFR on? It's pretty hard to say. The game has a ton of issues on pretty much every platform, but I think I would have to say Vive with VFL as my favourite. The game absolutely needs smooth movement for the best experience, especially in the more difficult later levels. The aim controller on PlayStation VR would have come close to beating it were it not for the lag issues, as that is a pretty solid controller and feels awesome for gunplay. But if you can't stomach smooth movement, then the lag issues aren't really an issue, and the aim is a very solid way to play with teleporting. Third to these would have to be playing with a gamepad. While not as immersive as using your actual hands, it is nonetheless an amazing experience to play like a traditional FPS, provided you can stomach the smooth movement and rotation. Give it a try if you can, it really adds another layer to the game. Now the Rift falls behind the rest, unfortunately due to the graphics issues and complete lack of left hand support. It would have been nice if they had supported the Rift during development, but it is what it is, and there are ways to make Rift play nicer, but there are a few issues. And Windows Mixed Reality comes lucky last, due to the unfortunately too small touchpad and field of view. Hopefully patches in the near future can fix some of these issues on the different platforms, but as it stands right now, this is how I'd have to rank the different platforms. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it informative. Let me know below in the comments how you feel about the game. How well do you think it stacks up on the different platforms? And if you want to keep up to date whenever I release new videos, be they mega plays, tests, or just gameplay vids, hit that subscribe button down below and make sure to leave a like. Again, I hope you enjoyed the video and I will see you in the next one.